This is Bottom Line Africa. Thank you for staying with us. Now, Amnesty International has been investigating the quest for justice in fragile South Sudan over half a decade since a deadly civil war brought the world's youngest nation to its knees. Thousands of civilians have been killed, a countless number raped, tortured, arbitrarily detained or forcibly eliminated since the deadly December 2013 clashes between the South Sudanese government and opposition forces. Are the victims, coupled with the hundreds of thousands displaced, likely to obtain justice? Well, joining us now to delve deeper into the issues is Amnesty International's Africa Advocacy Coordinator, that is Dr. Japheth Biegon. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Shirley, for having me.
All right, so I will start with the title of the report. Do you think we will prosecute ourselves? Tell us more about that.
The title of the report, Do You Think We Will Prosecute Ourselves, is derived from a statement of a public official of the government of South Sudan who said this, suggesting in a way that the South Sudanese government and the officials are not ready to hold themselves accountable for the serious violations of human rights that has been committed in the country since 2013, when the conflict erupted in the country.
All right, so then with such quotes or such, people saying such words, then is justice possible for grave human rights violation in fragile states like South Sudan?
So in a sense, that quote is part of the findings of the research that we did in South Sudan, which points to the fact that South Sudanese government officials are not intent on investigating and prosecuting individuals that have committed gross human rights violations and crimes that have been documented since the start of the conflict. It's one of the findings that has led us to reach the conclusion that, as is currently established, the civilian courts, the judicial system in South Sudan has no political will and has no capacity to try perpetrators. And as such, it is why the report is recommending that the African Union should step up its pressure on South Sudan, one, to sign the Memorandum of Understanding and the statute that will lead to the establishment of the Hybrid Court of South Sudan.
All right. Let me just take you back. In September 2018, a military court convicted 10 government soldiers of killing a journalist and raping aid workers at the Terrain Hotel in July 2016. It is so far the only prosecution of crimes committed in the conflict. And even then, the trial largely happened because of pressure from foreign governments seeking to secure justice for their citizens. So then, what needs to be done to aid the judicial system in South Sudan? Because clearly we have, according to your findings, we found out that, of course, they're not ready. So what needs to be done to aid that judicial system?
Yes, indeed, the case that you have mentioned, the Terrain Hotel case, is only one of the cases that has been investigated and prosecuted by a martial court in South Sudan. Outside that single case, there's been no any other case that has been investigated and prosecuted. Then, what needs to be done? As the report that we've just published recommends, there is a need to rebuild the entire judicial system in South Sudan, to reform the judicial system, and in particularly to deal with two things. One is to ensure that there is judicial independence and autonomy of the judiciary. Currently, judicial officers are working or making decisions at the behest of the executive. And then secondly, the department or the directorate of public prosecution should also be independent. And as things stand today, the directorate of public prosecutions also act and on the behest and at the whims of the executive. There is therefore no independence, both from the Directorate of Public Prosecutions and of the judiciary. So there is a legal reform that is needed urgently to ensure that these institutions are independent and are able to conduct impartial, independent, and trials that meet international threshold or standards.
So could it be that the problem is actually the executive and these other bodies are actually scared of the executive? Because we've seen on at least two occasions, President Kiir dismissed judges of civilian courts violating the laws of the country. So could he be the problem?
The executive is indeed the primary primary actor in terms of interfering with the independence of the judiciary and the independence of the Directorate of Public Prosecution. And it is true that judges in particular are afraid of reprisals, and some of them have resigned from their office primarily because of the interference and fear of the reprisals for the decisions that they make that might be seen as to be against the executive or actually against the executive. So it is true, as you rightly point out, that the executive interference of the judiciary is the big major elephant in the room.
Is there a way to even protect the lives of the people that are scared of the executive?
There is, if the judicial system is reformed as we've recommended, that will also mean witness protection mechanisms are put in place. It will mean that the independence of the judiciary is respected, and therefore judges and magistrates will be able to make decisions without fear of reprisal. So this goes down to the question of rebuilding the judiciary in the country.
South Sudan is a fragile state. We're aware that the power sharing agreement that was supposed to be implemented hasn't been implemented yet. It's taking more time than it was perceived. And many have argued that this could be one of the major issues that is fueling injustices in the country. What do you think about that?
Yes, so it's to some extent the peace agreement, especially even the revitalized peace agreement signed in September last year, has been violated. We've seen violations of ceasefire agreements. But one of the key findings that we make in relation to the conflict and the resurgence of the conflict is that justice is an important part of the peacemaking process. We've seen resurgence of conflict in South Sudan primarily because key high-level perpetrators are not being held to account, and they therefore have entertained and maintained a culture of impunity. And without dealing with the culture of impunity, then it's possible that the violence and the violations that we've seen in the country will continue. So the key, as the report recommends, is to deal with the culture of impunity by holding those perpetrators that have committed those crimes accountable.
Do we know them, the perpetrators?
The Commission, the African Union Commission of Inquiry, in the report that it released, had a list of several individuals that are suspected to have committed those crimes. The United Nations Security Council has also issued sanctions to people that it suspects have been committed those crimes. Our own research has pointed to certain individuals in previous research that we've conducted, certain individuals that have committed those crimes. So that's why we are calling for investigations to ensure that, and the establishment of the hybrid court of South Sudan, so that these individuals can be investigated and be brought before those competent courts and be tried in fair trial. So
with all the solutions that Amnesty International has put in place, point blank I'm asking you, will they get justice?
In terms of the victims?
Yes, the victims.
If, as the report recommends, the victims of South Sudan that spoke to us and in subsequent and in successive research that we've conducted over the years, the victims of the violations and abuses in South Sudan have placed their hope in the hybrid court. And that's why this report, its main key recommendation is that the hybrid court should be urgently established. And there are two things in that regard. First, the South Sudan government should, within the next 6 or so months, sign the Memorandum of Understanding and the status for its establishment. Failing that, we are calling on the African Union to move speedily, one, to establish a roadmap, and then two, if that roadmap is not respected by South Sudan, then unilaterally establish an ad hoc court.
All right, thank you. Guess we'll have to wait and see how this goes. But thank you very much, Dr. Japhet Biegon, Amnesty International African Advocate.